great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass. Bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate ground for the vision place of souls. Men and women from generations that know us not shall come through this deathless field to ponder and dream. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain.
The Battle of Gettysburg was the most important battle ever fought on American soil. In a very real sense, the fate of the nation hung in the balance here. For 3 days in July of 1863, men of the North and the South fought with as much passion, courage, and conviction as ever recorded in the history of warfare. The fighting transformed the lush Pennsylvania countryside into a killing field, littered with bodies of the dead and dying. The very soul of the nation was torn open here, leaving huge physical and psychological wounds. Echoes of the battle continue to reverberate even today. In its aftermath, some say that wounds opened during that distant July over a century ago may still be festering, and that Gettysburg has a huge unseen population of tormented, restless souls caught somewhere between life and death. For almost 20 years, writer and historian Mark Nesbitt has researched and written about poltergeist activity in Gettysburg.
This may very well be, acre for acre, the most haunted place in America. It seems as if that whenever there's a traumatic experience, a battle where many men have died, or where there's a great expenditure of emotional energy, it seems like that's a place where ghosts, if you want to call them that, linger, or spirits linger. When they're torn from this life too suddenly, when their lives are left unfinished, it seems that is a place where ghosts may remain. Approximately 200,000 men came here for 3 days in July of 1863. 51,000 became casualties, killed, wounded, and missing in those 3 days. The fascination with ghost stories, I think, comes from a question that we all have. What happens after we die? What happens to the dead?
Mark Nesbitt's interest in ghosts came about when he was working for the Park Service. Interestingly, some of the best stories came from park rangers themselves.
While I worked for them, I did various things such as night patrol, and whenever I would finish night patrol, I'd end up talking to a few people afterwards, and they would ask me, well, since you've been out on the battlefield at night, have you seen any ghosts out there? And I would have to admit, no, I didn't see any ghosts. And so they would say, well, have you heard the story about this ghost? Or let me tell you what happened to me out on the battlefield. And just being a natural collector of things, I started jotting these down. And that's how I began collecting these stories.
The ghosts of Gettysburg do not just linger on the battlefield. They seem to inhabit every nook and cranny of the town itself, even the college campus.
What we call Gettysburg College today was once known as Pennsylvania College. And it was much, much smaller than it is today. There were only 3 buildings on the Pennsylvania College campus. There was Linnaean Hall, there was a building called the White House, and a very, very large edifice called Old Dorm, today called Pennsylvania Hall. The fighting occurred just a few hundred yards to the north of the college campus. That meant that any structure back there was immediately confiscated by the surgeons and used as hospitals. Every single structure was filled to overflowing with the wounded refuse of the battle. Old Dorm, being one of the largest structures in the area, was also filled to overflowing. The lower floors they used mostly for the operating rooms, the upper floors for the recovery rooms. It's July, it's hot. The lower floors soon became sticky with gore and the heat and sweat of wounded men.
Amputations were a common thing, and to throw the bone out the window or bones out the window on both sides or doors or whatever, or they carried them out in baskets or however they did it, You know, the old belief that the National Cemetery is the only place that anybody was buried during the Battle of Gettysburg, I think, is fictitious. As these people were dumping stuff, they weren't carrying them out other places and being real cautious and careful as they might be today at a hospital or something like that. I believe if they dug the areas, and I'm certainly not advocating come dig on my campus, because you will be arrested if you do that. But I believe if they dug down, they'd probably run tons of artifacts and probably some bones, and it'd probably be pretty amazing what all they'd run into, because it's been there for so long.
Old Dorm now is the administration building for Gettysburg College. And the people over there are hardworking individuals. They work sometimes late into the night. And two administrators were working late one night and decided finally that they were exhausted and decided to wrap it up. So they walked down the hall together to the elevator, the same elevator they had taken hundreds of times before, down to the exit on the first floor. They got in the elevator, pushed the button for the first floor, and the elevator descended 3, 2, 1, and then continued past the first floor down to the basement.
Little did they know that the elevator was taking them to a special haunting, courtesy of the ghosts of Gettysburg.
Of course, they assumed that the elevator was acting up, and so they punched the button for the first floor again. But instead of the elevator going up, it stopped at the basement. The doors opened to reveal a horrifying scene out of time and reason. Instead of the cleaned up area that they had seen so many times before, that was a storage area in the basement, the doors opened to reveal a Civil War hospital scene. Amputations going on, orderlies walking around carrying armloads of severed limbs, surgeons working and sweating in this man-made hell, wounded soldiers writhing in the corner, waiting to be operated on, other people in agony in the far reaches of this area. The women almost panicked. This scene was just so unbelievable and incredible to them. They punched frantically at the buttons, trying to punch the first floor button to get them out of this. One of the surgeons looked up from the grisly task before him and beckoned to them beseechingly to come in and help with this never-ending ordeal that he'd been going through for 120 years. And of course, to enter this scene was the last thing they wanted to do. All they wanted to do was leave. They punched frantically at the buttons again, and finally, slowly, the doors began to close, and the elevator took them back to the first floor.
One of the women immediately reported the incident to campus security.
Something had frightened her, because she obviously, just by her emotions and her mannerisms, was scared, literally scared to death. The individual making the report was an administrator for the college, a person that I had known prior to the incident and after the incident, always pretty level-headed, very normal. We went over and the elevator was fine, the mechanisms in the elevator was fine. There was nothing in the basement. We checked the building to make sure it wasn't a college prank. There was no indication of any kind of outside entry, anything unusual that would warrant thinking that this was somebody that had made up the story just for attention.
I think people are frightened of ghosts because it's the unknown. Suddenly you're confronted with a situation you've never been in before, and certainly something like an apparition that shouldn't be there or appears to be in the wrong place at the wrong time is going to frighten us. It certainly would frighten me.
As writer of the Ghosts of Gettysburg books, Mark Nesbitt has developed a unique perspective on his elusive subject matter. To rule out hoax, each story must go through a rigid process of authentication before being published.
What I try and do is interview the people. I talk to them at least 3, sometimes 4 times before I finally write the story down. The first time either they call me or someone refers them to me. I'll give them a call, have them tell me the story. Usually I'll call them again and talk to them again, and then have an eye-to-eye interview with them. And that sometimes will reveal more about the person. It's very difficult to lie to somebody when you're going face to face.
Another fabled Gettysburg ghost story emanating from the college campus occurred at Stevens Hall, which, along with Pennsylvania Hall, is legendary for its poltergeist activity.
Stevens Hall on the Gettysburg College campus was not here at the time of the battle. It was built between 1865 and 1868. Perhaps one of the more recurrent stories of Stevens Hall is what the women there who live there have called the Blue Boy. It goes back to the time, perhaps, when Stevens Hall was used as a preparatory school for Gettysburg College. And also it may have its roots back at the time when Gettysburg had an orphanage on the south end of town. Apparently there was a cruel headmistress there. Some people say that some of the women who lived in Stevens rescued a young boy from this cruel headmistress and hid him in their room over one winter here at Gettysburg. The women were confronted by a knock on the door and the headmistress of Stevens Hall when they were hiding this young man. They hustled him out onto the windowsill because it was the only place they could hide him. When the headmistress opened the door, she searched around the room and couldn't find this young man, and then told these women that they would have to come downstairs and talk with her for a while. For about an hour, she grilled them in front of the cozy, warm fire, and of course their thoughts kept going back to this young man.
In the dead of the harsh Pennsylvania winter, the freezing young boy was forced to cling to the ledge, 3 stories above the ground.
Finally, the headmistress let them go. They bolted up the stairs, threw open the window, and couldn't find the young boy anywhere. They ran back downstairs trying to find any evidence of the fact that he had fallen, and they could find nothing. There was no mark in the snow below the window where he may have fallen, no footprints, nothing, no evidence at all where he may have gotten to.
The mysterious disappearance of the young boy from the ledge has never been fully explained. A mystery remains, and maybe a ghost. For over the last 80 or 90 years, nearly every generation of women living in Stevens Hall has reported encounters with an apparition they have named the Blue Boy.
Taken on a bluish tinge, the color of human skin after it's been exposed too long to the cold weather.
Even more mysterious are messages possibly sent from the Blue Boy to women presently living on the 3rd floor of the old hall. We may never solve the Blue Boy riddle, for ghosts throughout history remain one of life's great mysteries. Dr. Charles Emmons of the Sociology and Anthropology departments at the college has spent years exploring the shadowlands of the Gettysburg landscape.
I think it's normal in our society not to believe in ghosts. Perhaps 12 to 20% believe in ghosts. And less than 10% probably have had a ghost experience. And if you want to be scientific about it, you should be skeptical. The only thing that bothers me is that some people just don't look at the evidence. So we have a choice between ignoring the evidence and sticking with safe, normal science, or examining the absurd and perhaps learn something that goes beyond science at this point.
One building in the Gettysburg area that has spawned its share of ghost lore is the Cashtown Inn.
The Cashtown Inn is another one of these buildings or structures that certainly a lot of emotional energy swirled around at one time and perhaps lingers in. The inn itself was there for years and years and years before the Battle of Gettysburg, but played an important part in the campaign.
The inn was built about 1800. One of the earlier innkeepers here started demanding cash payment only for services. Usually people travel in those days like to either do it with trade, barter, or work it off. But he'd have none of that. He used to demand cash payment. Thus, the word passed up and down the turnpike, when you came through this cluster of homes, you better have cash money. Therefore, that's how the town got its name of Cashtown, derived from that innkeeper who did demand cash payments.
During the Civil War, the inn became a landmark to the Confederate Army.
Few buildings anywhere in the country, including the South, that housed more Confederate generals and officers than the Cashtown Inn did, because just about all of Lee's army came past this front door, and it was easy to stop here and fill their canteens up, and the troopers, and come in here with the generals and officers and partake of liquor and also information. Everyone from General Lee to General Hill, I'm sure General Longstreet, part of Ewell's Corps, all these staff officers, brigade commanders, division commanders, all came through that front door of the inn. The Cashtown Inn had seen so much activity during the war days that I honestly do believe that there was something left behind here, because all these old structures, with the events that unfolded around them and the decisions that were made in these places, would have to generate some sort of energy. I personally believe that there's something in the inn that you really can't put your hands on, that you can't personally see. I get to feel the presence, and I've had enough of people tell me stories that I can't dismiss all of them, and I do try to explain most of them away as just being an old building with a lot of drafts and a lot of cold areas and a lot of noises and a lot of creaks. But when certain people from different parts of the country tell you enough of stories and they don't know anything about these books that's been written or different things that have been done on this here, you almost have to find truth in what they're saying.
Room number 4 at the inn has received the most attention because of reports of odd sights, sounds, and happenings by various guests.
We have people come here specifically asked to stay in room number 4, and that's because they have an interest in spirits too. But I explained to them that if there is a spirit of the Cashtown Inn, that he's not confined to any particular room or space, and there's been stories told about him being seen or things happening in different parts of the inn.
You can pick it up again, like some kind of radio waves or some kind of movie that was left behind. There is an attachment to the place of some kind, but we don't really know how it works. Now, it's possible that it's just a spirit hanging around in that place and the energy is focused in that area.
One phenomenon that continues to astonish proprietor Bud Buckley is the continual recurrence of a Confederate soldier in the hallways. Those who have seen him always describe exactly the same scene.
The people who have said they've seen this image in this place, be it employees here over the years or people who stayed here and visited here, they all describe this image the same way, and that's another thing I can't explain away. I've never seen them give it a dramatic effect like with a sword or a gun or a saber drawn. I never say, did you see this image? What did it have on? Did it have a hat? Did it have a short coat? I let the people explain to me what they saw, and so many times their description comes out almost exactly the same, and I cannot figure that out.
These are evidential cases in the sense that many people report the same kind of event in the same spot where the same traumatic events occurred during the battle or throughout the hundreds of years of Gettysburg history.
Over the years, 2 photographs taken at the inn have spawned their share of controversy and interest. Some say the inn's apparitions have been caught on film.
We have a photograph here that was taken around the turn of the century. We assume that there is one person in this picture having this photograph taken, and if you look off to the left of this photograph, there's another image there. But this gentleman standing at attention and facing towards Gettysburg, and he much does look like he could be a Confederate soldier with a short coat and a kepi on. And in those days, to get your photograph taken, it was an event, and you would stand side by side. You would not be standing apart on the porch and standing very rigid and not even facing the camera. Some people have suggested this could be an apparition.
The other photo, taken recently, has added even more mystery to the inn's ghostly reputation.
So I got a photograph from some people who had passed by and took a picture of the inn and had sent me a copy. And in one of our windows upstairs, it's a very clear image of something looking out our window. It was taken on a perfectly cloudy day, and of all the photographs I've had people give me over the years of supposedly images and faces in the glass, this is one I cannot explain away because it's so real looking, and the fact there was nobody in the place. And we've tried to recreate it on cloudy days and cannot find any kind of reflection in that window that would do what this particular picture did.
Another historic place where ghosts seem to linger is the Gettysburg Park itself. One bizarre incident that happened at the park involved a group of visiting dignitaries.
One of the very first stories that I heard about the battlefield, that's been whispered about and talked about by the park rangers through the years, is a story about a group of visiting dignitaries who had been taken on a battlefield tour by the National Park Service. A special tour was arranged just for them. They visited the various sites, and they got to one of the battle sites and got out of their car, and they were about to observe and be explained the battle action in that area. They looked down into a little valley, and lo and behold, there was a unit down there, a Civil War unit, dressed just like they would have been at the time of the war. They began maneuvering, marching, forward marching, doing the flank maneuvers, the column left, and the wheeling. An evolution is what they call it of a regiment in battle drill. And the dignitaries were very, very pleased that the National Park Service would put on this demonstration just for their benefit.
What they may have seen was the park's Phantom Regiment. Over the years, numerous visitors have witnessed exactly the same scene.
When they got back to the headquarters of the National Park, they thanked the person that was in charge very, very much for that wonderful demonstration of the reenactment group that he had scheduled for them. Of course, the individual that was in charge of everything was nonplussed. He had scheduled no reenactors for the battlefield that day and knew of no battlefield reenactors that were at the site at that time. Of course, they all have to check in and make sure that they are certified so that they may go out on the battlefield.
The foreign dignitaries who saw this apparent reenactment on the battlefield thought it was real. They had no idea that it was an apparition until later. We have many people seeing the same thing, which means it's an evidential case. It's not just one person's hallucination. There have been some reenactment cases, if you want to call them that, in which the soldiers were not realistic looking. They were shadowy shapes. They may not have moved around. Collective apparitions, but not full like this one. There have been other observations like this on the battlefield, but this is, I think, the best one.
Some ghosts are menacing, but most seem to be just lost, wandering souls.
There's no doubt that people, having seen film and TV, have this idea that ghosts are malevolent and are attempting to harm someone. But I don't believe this is the case. The idea that they're caught between worlds trying to work out problems, I think, is fairly prevalent. The ghost stories that I've collected, the ghosts appear to be just more or less stuck in this particular area.
Many people even learn to live with the ghosts that inhabit their homes.
A friend of mine who was going on to a distinguished law career in Baltimore told me the story of how she was at a party at one of the fellows who lived in one of the apartments here in Gettysburg. The kids like to get together and have parties just like any other college town.
It was a Friday night party at the home of other college students who were renting Civil War House. The Civil War House was designed like many other Civil War homes. The older part of the house was in the back, and at the front of the house was the living room, which had been added in the 1930s or 40s.
She was in the modern section of the house, and the party was going on, and she looked through a couple of doors into the older section of the house, and she noticed a young man standing there.
I was very struck by the fact that he looked sad. When I looked closer, I realized that it seemed there were tears running down his face, and it seemed as if he wanted to move forward into the rest of the house where the party was taking place, but couldn't. For some reason, was being held back.
She waved to him to try and get him to join the party, but he didn't respond. It's almost as if he can't make it into the modern section of the house.
I turned to the boy that was standing next to me. He was one of the students who lived in the house, and asked him who was standing in the doorway. And his only response to me was, "Oh, you see him too." And he explained that there was a ghost living in the house, that all of the occupants of the house had seen the ghost from time to time, and they had just become used to him being around.
I think that's a very interesting haunting case. And what's especially interesting about it is that the ghost seems to be paying attention to the party. Something is happening that seems to be of interest to the ghost. This is a case where people are not afraid of a ghost. They know that other people have seen it, and it's not a traumatic situation. Other people might react differently and be just so upset by anything apparently paranormal that they would want to leave.
Up until that time, I didn't believe at all in ghosts, was very skeptical, and now I do believe. I was told that the house where this took place had been used as a field hospital during the battle, and that there had been a drummer boy who'd been wounded and taken to that location. None of it was scary. I was very surprised. It was just very sad because he was so sad.
There are those, though, who will never believe a ghost story.
Do you believe in ghosts yourself?
No.
You're not a believer at all?
No.
I have collected in just 3 years or 4 years approximately 130 stories of ghostly activities, sightings on the battlefield and in the environs of Gettysburg. If someone says that ghosts don't exist, then they're going to have to prove that to these 130 or so individuals who've seen these things, who've actually experienced this. Virtually every major religion on the face of the earth believes in some sort of life after death. Whether this life after death that the religions believe in manifests itself in ghostly activity, or whether it manifests itself in reincarnation or heaven, certainly that points to some sort of existence after death.
Sir, do you believe in ghosts?
Yes, I do. Somewhat. I think there's something out there, some other world that we don't know about yet. What it is, I don't know.
Mark Nesbitt is definitely not alone in his interest with the spirit world. Even the Civil War residents of the White House were fascinated by it.
Abraham Lincoln was involved in the spiritual world. He allegedly had seances at the White House. Certainly his wife was involved, Mary Todd Lincoln, was interested in the spiritual. A number of residents of the White House have noticed or even sometimes complained about presences in the White House. So many of the presidents have seen spirits in the most famous house in America.
It seems ghosts can be very territorial. One ghost in particular seems to have laid claim to the Devil's Den area of the Gettysburg National Park.
One morning, a woman came in to the Park Service headquarters and asked her, "Are there any ghosts out at Devil's Den?" And of course, the official Park Service stance is not to recognize the other world out on the Gettysburg battlefield. The history and the things that really happened out there are tough enough to explain. But the ranger was interested, and so she asked the woman, "Why? What did you see out there?" And the woman said, "Well, I was out there early this morning, and I kind of got turned around and lost. And so I got out of my car and walked into Devil's Den and decided I was going to take a picture. It was a pretty morning, and I needed a couple more shots on my camera." And she said, "I had the camera up to my eye, and all of a sudden I felt a presence."
What you're looking for is over there.
And the woman said, "I turned and went to take a picture, and when I turned around, he was gone. He just disappeared."
The woman wasn't the only witness of the ghost of Devil's Den. Over the years, there have been other sightings of the scraggly apparition, and each time he's been described as looking exactly the same, like a war-weary soldier from a long-ago Texas regiment.
One of the regiments that's most associated with Devil's Den is the 1st Texas. Fought so hard, sacrificed so much to drive the Union soldiers out of Devil's Den. Many of the Texas regiments from Hood's division were described by their own contemporaries as being rather rugged looking. Remember, Texas was the frontier back then.
The Civil War hospital ghosts in the basement of Pennsylvania Hall at Gettysburg College aren't the only ghosts that have been spotted on the old campus. Since the war, each graduating class has had its share of ghost stories to tell.
I think it probably is haunted. In fact, one of the people in one of my classes constantly comes in and she tells us stories of things that happened to her in her house.
All of the quads here were actually burial grounds for soldiers, so every time I walk over them at night, I think about it. And I mean, it just gives you an eerie feeling when you walk across campus really late sometimes.
There's a persistent sighting of a sentry or a guard, or some call him a signalman, up in the cupola of Old Dorm. The rumor goes that Robert E. Lee used the cupola for a while as a lookout post. We were not sure whether he did or not, but it certainly makes sense that he would be up there since it was the highest spot in the area.
I interviewed one of the people firsthand who had the experience, and one of my students that I worked with very closely saw it himself. I believe him if he said it, and he knows of another person who did, and there was at least one other time where someone was interviewed for a paper in my class. The person saw the same thing essentially on the cupola.
The campus theater also has a history of ghost activity.
There's a story that comes from Klein Theater. And the story is that there is a certain officer, a general officer dressed in a Confederate uniform, who appears on certain nights. He was seen by a couple of stagehands. They were preparing the stage. There was a chair in the middle of the stage. One stagehand was up on a ladder. Another one had just walked onto the stage. And the one on the ladder looked down and happened to see in the empty chair the general sitting there, called to the other one. As the other one turned and got a glimpse of him, the general disappeared.
Ghost sightings have been reported in many other buildings on campus. Back at Stevens Hall, the Blue Boy isn't the only unannounced visitor to the girls' dorm.
There are numerous reports of the sighting of a young girl in some of the rooms who doesn't really belong there. She seems to be interested in the clothing of the modern-day women who inhabit Stevens at this time. The women come back from a late-night date, open the door to their room, and they see a young girl standing there.
Hey, what are you doing?
The woman ran into the closet after her and could find no intruder, no young woman in the closet, and no route of escape from that closet.
Off campus, another resident of Gettysburg who had a ghostly encounter was a woman who worked late at night typing papers for college professors. Her poltergeist encounter ran the full spectrum of ghostly communication.
Ghosts seem to be able to communicate on not just a visual level, but an auditory level, on a olfactory level, and a tactile level as well. So there are many different manifestations of ghosts.
The woman had never felt comfortable since moving into a huge old house located on Broadway. One night, she found out why.
I began to have these feelings that something was wrong. I just didn't feel that we were alone in the house, that I felt another presence there. I started feeling a sensation that someone was behind me. You know how you feel when someone is standing behind you. And I turned around and nobody was there. And I thought, this is strange.
Besides the feeling that something was watching her, she was also overcome by the sensation that she was sitting in the middle of a cold spot, a phenomenon that often accompanies ghost sightings.
It's a chill that you cannot explain. I mean, no amount of cold weather has ever given me this type of chill. I've never had a cold from, say, snow or anything like that to chill the very core of me. And this chill does. It goes right through you.
Cold spots are very interesting. I found that all of the people who had a feeling of cold had the feeling of cold before the apparition occurred. Most people, if you ask them, would assume that you feel cold because you're scared by the ghost. But in all of my cases, people got cold first and then had the apparition.
Most of all, though, there lingered the feeling that she was not alone.
The feeling persisted, just this overbearing feeling that something was behind me. And again, I turned around. At one point, I got up, walked out into the next room. I felt more and more ill at ease, that something was there, something was wanting me out of the family room, or at least off the bottom floor, off the first floor of the house. The fear became really intense.
Still, there was always the possibility that her mind was playing games with her. She had a job to do and a pressing deadline, so she decided to go back to work. Being haunted was not the first thing that came to mind when she tried to figure out what was happening. But finally, the feeling became too much.
I felt that whatever it was just wanted me out of the way, so I accommodated it, and I left. I just felt that I needed to get upstairs right away. I stopped and looked back toward the library, and when I did, I saw this large column of blue light coming from the family room that I had just left. It was just long, symmetrical, glowing blue light. Well, needless to say, I didn't stay long in that spot. I mean, I don't even remember making it up the rest of the stairs at night.
The incident profoundly scared and confused her, but not enough to drive her from the house.
She's probably wondering if this is really happening and if she should give it full attention. It's a difficult thing to decide. I don't think she was necessarily entirely freaked out about the situation. She was concerned. She was upset in a particular moment. But she would decide to just leave and run away, go upstairs, and it would go away. I think she didn't think that it was that serious that she had to leave.
Within days, she returned to her nocturnal work habits. But now she also observed the light patterns made by cars passing the house, believing there must be some rational reason for the mysterious blue light.
I would stand late at night after I'd turn out the lights and wait for a car to come by, to turn the corner, to come down in front of the house, to see if lights from the street would cast this light in the library. Never once did I ever see a car light cast the same shadow or the same light in the room.
Still, she began to experience the same sensations as before, the chilling cold spots and the intense feeling that she was not alone. Also on this night came the sounds.
I started hearing sounds coming from the library of papers being rattled around. It sounded like someone was going through my husband's desk. When the noises started getting much worse, much louder, more intense, and once I got up enough nerve, I got up and went in to check it out. Of course, nothing was there. I went back to my typing and was trying to overcome the fear that I had of what I had just seen.
Almost immediately, the noises in the other room started up again.
She decided that was it. She wasn't going to work anymore. She started going up the stairs and paused just for a second to look around to see if maybe her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. And the blue column was there. Not only was it standing in the doorway, but as she paused, it started moving out of the doorway and towards her. Needless to say, she sprinted up the rest of the stairs. And this shook her up for a while because she didn't go back to her late night work for several nights.
Although frightening, these strange encounters were also intriguing, and they began to tap into something the ghost may not have expected in the woman: grit and determination. For she decided not to be run out of her own house by the apparition.
I couldn't give in to it, and more than that, I wasn't going to allow anything that I couldn't see scare me from living my life the way I wanted to live.
Having failed to scare her away, the ghost saved its greatest performance for last.
I had to stop and look over my shoulder again, and there in the doorway was the blue column of light. And in the column of light was the distinct features of a man. All in all, I thought he was quite handsome. He was quite dashing. But yet at the same time, it scared the dickens out of me. He had this puzzled expression on his face, as if he was saying, "Why aren't you leaving?" It was like, "Why are you still here?"
By showing himself, the ghost had made the game clear. This was a battle for territory. Suddenly, she knew what to do.
This is my house! Get out! Out!
It sounds like an exorcism. I don't know how to take this exactly. It could be that she just somehow made the spirit feel that it wasn't worth the conflict. She was arguing back. She had dealt with the trauma, and it wouldn't occur to her again.
There's something in me that says sometimes if you can put a face to your fear, it will help you to overcome it. There's no doubt in my mind that what I experienced in that house was something paranormal. What I experienced was real.
Tourists and townspeople alike are drawn to the Gettysburg ghost phenomena. Now emanating from the town square are the Ghosts of Gettysburg tours, spawned by the stories in Mark Nesbitt's books.
It's just eerie because it all happened around here, and then they have all these, you know, it's like they have so much proof that it happened. It's neat.
I've never been to this part of Gettysburg before. I'm more familiar with the battleground itself, like the Pickett's Charge, Devil's Den, Little Round Trap. So the Gettysburg College campus I wasn't too familiar with. So in that respect, it was really enlightening.
I'm a little surprised at how popular they are. I'm pleased because it's finally bringing people down to the downtown area of Gettysburg. Many people come to Gettysburg and assume that it's just a battlefield and a motel. No, we have a downtown area too in Gettysburg, and that's where the ghost tours take them.
Is the Battle of Gettysburg still being fought in the spirit world? No one knows for sure. But there are hundreds of people who have spotted ghosts in Gettysburg who will tell you yes.
October 1995 means more great storytelling when Greystone Films premieres Ghosts of Gettysburg 2. Another fascinating journey into the world of the supernatural.
Is the Civil War still being fought in the spirit world around Gettysburg? There are many who say yes. In July of 1863, the greatest battle of the war was fought here. For 3 heart-stopping days, armies of the North and the South poured their very existence into an epic clash that ultimately changed the course of the war. The price for the battle came high, and it was paid for in blood. By the conflict's end, over 50,000 men were listed as killed, wounded, or missing. Over a century has now passed since the guns of war were silenced. Yet persistent sightings around Gettysburg of phantom soldiers has become a routine occurrence. The historic little Pennsylvania village may very well be the most haunted place in America. Writer and historian Mark Nesbitt has spent nearly 2 decades chronicling the phenomena of the ghosts of Gettysburg.
There seems to be a lot more ghostly activity or paranormal activity in Gettysburg for one reason or another. Certainly a concentration of death. People were fighting here not only for their lives, but for a great cause.
No one knows for sure, but it seems the creation of a ghost is the end result of a complex and tragic set of events.
What exactly is a ghost? I think a ghost is some sort of energy source that maybe we haven't been able to define yet. These energy sources seem to come from places or seem to remain in places where some great trauma has occurred, some incredibly large emotional energy has been expended. And of course, the battlefield of Gettysburg is a place where a great deal of emotional energy was expended. Some people call it residue haunting.
A classic Gettysburg ghost story was born out of one of the most bizarre incidents of the entire Civil War.
On the first day's battle, July 1st, 1863, the area called Seminary Ridge was first held by Union troops, and then Confederates swept over that area and held it. Of course, Robert E. Lee was the commanding general of the Confederate Army. There were dead soldiers all over the area, and his aides, no doubt, told the other soldiers to clean this area up since the commanding general was going to use this as his headquarters. It was hot. It was July. The first thing that they did is they gathered up all the bodies, and rather than burying them right there in front of Robert E. Lee, what they did is they would put them in basically cold storage.
Nearby, an old barn was found that had a stone floor.
They brought the bodies in. They just piled them up very quickly like cordwood in this cool area so that they wouldn't decompose quite as quickly.
With the great battle raging just outside the walls of the barn, the stacked bodies inside were forgotten for the moment. The rebels were now concentrating their efforts and energy on tasks for the living rather than caring for the dead. There was just one problem. A mistake had been made. The man had been wounded and was unconscious when picked up off the field, but he was decidedly not dead.
Help me! He, no doubt, was paralyzed partially, and of course with hundreds and hundreds of pounds of human flesh lying on top of him, he couldn't crawl out. He couldn't remove himself from that hideous situation.
It was the beginning of a waking nightmare.
Perhaps one of the worst nightmares any human being can imagine is being buried alive. You can't move, you can't remove yourself from the situation. It's dark, you're trapped. And of course, in his situation, it was even worse because he had human flesh that was decomposing right above him. And of course, you can just imagine the smells and the bodily fluids and the just the sheer horror that this poor individual was experiencing as he lay underneath this pile of rotting human flesh.
The soldiers' cries fell on deaf ears. How could any man's voice be heard above the din of battle and the roar of cannon? Even at night, no one heard his pleas. For 3 days, the battle outside continued. The eyes of the world were focused on Gettysburg, but the ears were directed elsewhere, oblivious to the sound of the entombed man. And then, finally, mercifully, the fighting was over. The defeated Confederate army withdrew from the area. As in all battles, it was up to the victor to bury the dead. Triumphant Federal troops began the grim task of sorting bodies and digging graves. By this time, the young rebel had been under the body pile for 5 hellish days. When the Federals finally stumbled onto the pile in the barn, the soldier had almost no life left in him.
He was finally discovered by Union soldiers and obviously raving, perhaps insane from the frustration and the anger that he felt, and also the horror of the position he had been placed in and was unable to move out of. He died just a few days later.
In the aftermath of the battle, carpenters worked overtime building caskets. But it was soon apparent that the number of dead bodies in Gettysburg far exceeded the Union's ability to give all fallen soldiers a decent burial. Unmarked graves containing dozens of fallen men became the standard operating procedure of the day. In truth, only a few Confederate soldiers received proper burial at all. Perhaps because of the terrifying ordeal he had gone through in the barn, the young soldier, who had been buried alive, was now selected for such an honor. He was laid to rest in a casket just yards away from the old barn where he had spent his last terrifying hours.
Therefore can I lack nothing. You shall feed me in a green pasture. Lead me forth.
The ceremony apparently didn't appease his troubled, tortured spirit.
Even in death, you can imagine that he must have been very, very upset and very angry and perhaps even raging after death. Maybe he's caught in that netherland between life and death because of this anger, this unresolved rage that he felt.
Just days after he was buried, the old barn mysteriously burnt down. In its place, on the old stone foundation, a beautiful farmhouse was erected. Over the years, through each passing generation, every owner of the farmhouse reported that an angry, restless spirit dwelt in the basement of the house. It existed in a room located right where the young soldier had suffered and died. The spirit's anger and rage was so intense that it had driven many owners from the building. Even when it wasn't trying to scare people to death, it would play mind games with them.
A couple moved into the house, and right from the beginning, they felt that there was something not quite right, finally culminating in one night of absolute horror, when the door to that back room, to that little stone room, was banging and moving. The couple were sound asleep. They heard what the woman described as an explosion down in the cellar. She thought perhaps the furnace had exploded.
Along with the explosion, the spirit also cut the lights off. Being of strong Pennsylvania stock, the couple refused to be held prisoner in their own home by the angry ghost. They decided to go downstairs and confront it. The ghost had used this light trick before to intimidate the owners. The couple wanted an end to the nightmare, but they knew they'd have to appeal to a higher authority if they were going to rid themselves of the angry, tormented spirit.
They called in a priest. He confirmed that there was a spirit down there and that the spirit was tormented and unhappy and angry, that he had been left in that hideous pile.
Drastic measures were called for. It was decided that the priest would perform an exorcism, not just to bring peace to the house, but hopefully also to the tormented soldier's soul.
The exorcism is a very elaborate ritual using the cross, holy water, the text, a special text, special garments, and he had a desire to help the spirit along, to move the spirit along out of its horrible situation that it had been in for 13 decades. As soon as he got into the room, he detected rage and anger.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Cede this place to Christ.
He wasn't really sure whether he was going to be able to cleanse the house of this angry spirit or perhaps become a victim of it himself. The cleansing took an incredible amount of energy out of the priest.
Luckily, God was with the priest. His voice reached out over a century to the troubled soldier. Finally now, after all these years, the young man would mercifully be released from his burden, and he could finally rest in peace. As the priest left the room, he made one last gesture.
He put the sign of an exorcism, of a cleansing, on the door there. And it still is there today, a circle with a cross inside of it.
Located just inside the boundaries of the Gettysburg National Park is Spangler's Springs. Clearly, this is not one of the main tour destinations for most visitors to the park. Other areas saw much more spectacular action during the battle. Their main claim to fame since the war is because of recurrent sightings here of a ghost that has come to be known as the Woman in White. Legend has it that she is the sad spirit of a young woman who committed suicide at the Springs many years ago after the man she was about to marry broke off the relationship. Most recently, the despondent apparition was sighted by two vacationing nurses. They had heard there were ghosts in Gettysburg, but as veterans of the nursing profession, they approached everything with a high degree of skepticism.
Nursing, at least as far as what I do on one hand, is extremely organized. It's fairly scientific. You have your methods that you go through, and things usually go in steps 1, 2, 3. I'm usually someone who needs a lot of facts.
As darkness descended upon the park, they decided to tempt fate and stay after sundown.
Basically, we were touring the park at night. I like the wildlife. I went out to look for wildlife. We both were joking and talking about ghosts. So we had been making references to, let's pull over here and look and see if we can find anything. This looks like a good spot. I'm gonna cut the lights. We'd been sitting there. It had only seemed like maybe a few moments. I know it was probably a little more than that. It was probably 4 or 5 minutes when I heard this popping sound.
And then an inexplicable chain of events began to unfold.
Do you see that tree there?
Uh-huh.
I noticed on the knoll, the last tree on the right had what appeared to be like a white mist that was rising or coming around the tree. I kind of blinked a few times and I looked around and I looked back. This mist took shape. It took shape in the form of a human female. This person was all in white.
I think at that point it settled in with me that, oh geez, this is something that's really happening. Something did just appear out of thin air, out of the darkness of night, and things like that just don't happen. And at that point I did turn my head.
Although Jennifer looked away, Darla continued to watch, enthralled by the apparition. Neither nurse had ever heard anything about the tragic woman in white at this time, and yet the ghost seemed to communicate to them without words her tale of unbearable, suicidal grief.
That was when the sadness struck. I remember telling Jennifer, oh, she's so beautiful. She is just so beautiful, and it's so sad. And all of a sudden, the tears started running down my face.
You know, Darla, we need to go, and we need to drive out of here now.
By this time, Jennifer had had enough. Although Darla was completely caught up in the haunting, her friend wouldn't stay another second.
The reason I wanted to leave was simply because something had just appeared out of nothing. And that is really foreign to me.
After the incident, many were startled to hear such a wild tale from the two nurses.
I know what I saw. I don't feel challenged by their questions. It really doesn't bother me that they don't believe.
I always thought that I would be so compelled to somehow make them believe what I've seen, and it's really not important to me. I know what I saw, it was very vivid, and that's all I needed to know.
Along with Mark Nesbitt, another longtime observer of the ghosts of Gettysburg phenomena is Dr. Charles Emmons of the Anthropology and Sociology departments at Gettysburg College.
The world of a ghost. This is a very interesting question. I'm inclined to think that they go about a fairly active kind of life, if you want to call it that, and then just part of the time they intersect with us. So that I think we're inclined to imagine that ghosts are only active in one little period of time when we see them. But it seems more likely, more logical to me that they're going through a lot of activity, and then just once in a while our times or our space-time intersect, and that's when we observe them.
The sighting of a ghost is an extremely rare occurrence. Most witnesses of poltergeist activity describe the experience as almost an accident, something the ghost never intended in the first place.
A lot of times they're not paying very much attention to you. They seem kind of spacey, or a so-called dumb ghost, as opposed to a smart ghost, which is going to interact with you.
There's so many things we'd like to know about them. Do they have feelings? Do they enjoy themselves when we're not watching, when we are not tapped into their world, when we can't see them? Do they have enemies? Do they have friends? Do they love? We know probably that they have a sense of humor, at least the poltergeists or the mischievous ghosts that we have experienced. Or maybe they don't exist at all. Maybe they're just figments of our imaginations. We know for sure one thing, and that's that they're totally unpredictable.
In the summer of 1992, Hollywood came to town to film the major motion picture Gettysburg. Whenever possible, the producers try to stage scenes on the historic battleground in exactly the same places where the real action had taken place in 1863. They may have unintentionally disturbed the spirit world in the process.
It appears that whenever the physical status quo of an area, the historic area, is upset, there seems to be a lot more psychic activity that occurs. In other words, it seems as if the spirits or the ghosts don't like their routine upset.
After each day of filming, local people provided a shuttle service back into town for the thousands of reenactors who were participating in the battle scenes.
One woman was offering the services of her pickup truck to take some reenactors into the town of Gettysburg. And she dropped off a truckload of reenactors at one of the local restaurants and turned around, and she began driving back home.
It seems she had shuttled more off the battlefield than a bunch of movie reenactors.
She suddenly started to hear a tapping in the back of the truck. She looked in the rearview mirror, and she saw something that completely frightened her. Two Civil War soldiers were sitting in the bed of the truck. Was someone playing a practical joke on her? Had some of the reenactors not gotten out of the back of her truck when she had stopped? Certainly no one had gotten in. She was traveling way too fast once she left the restaurant for anyone to have climbed or jumped into the back of the truck.
How could it be a ghost? But that does happen, that people have a haunting contaminate them, so to speak, and they end up with the ghost somewhere else. Just as some people have moved out of a house and found that the ghosts have followed them.
She pulled over suddenly, leapt out of the cab, went to the rear of the truck, and no one was in the back of the truck. And one can only speculate on who these weary soldiers were trying to catch a ride on this strange, horseless conveyance.
Whether playing with your mind or just being mischievous and silly, nearly every human activity has been attributed to ghosts. This trickster element in ghostly behavior may also be responsible for numerous unexplained equipment breakdowns on the Gettysburg battlefield.
Countless people have had problems with cameras out in the triangular field area. I myself and two others, simultaneously our cameras broke down in that area. Other people have come up to me when I was out there giving tours and mentioned that all of a sudden their cameras have gone on the blink and they won't function anymore. They tell me when they get out of the triangular field area that the cameras are working fine again.
I think one of the most fascinating questions about ghosts is why there are so many equipment failures. I've had it happen to me. Cameras fail, and I can't remember anything like that happening except when I was doing something on the paranormal, especially ghosts. If there's some sort of psychic energy in a place that accounts for hauntings, then possibly that energy arrangement has something to do with equipment failures too.
One incident actually happened during the filming of Mark Nesbitt at the Triangular Field several years ago by veteran television producer John Jones. Mark warned the producer ahead of time that he was asking for trouble by trying to shoot the story in this haunted place.
He goes, no, he said, your cameras won't function in this field. Well, that was a cute story, that's fine, but, we're producers, we're in the real world, and yeah, my cameras will work. They were good cameras, it was new equipment. We had been shooting for a couple weeks up to this time. We asked Mark to step beyond the fence, and we set up our camera. And I was talking to Mark while the crew was setting the cameraman was setting up the camera, and he yelled, John, we've got a problem. And I looked, and he says, I've got a warning light in my viewfinder. I had looked over the fence towards Mark, and he's standing there with this sort of this all-knowing smile and shaking his head. I told you so. We hadn't experienced problems with it prior to this event. And we were shooting all morning until we arrived at the triangular field. But the moment we mounted that camera on the tripod and turned the switch on, until we left and lifted the camera off the tripod, we had all kinds of havoc. The camera worked fine the rest of the day. It's only at the triangular field that we have problems making any recordings.
Not all cameras malfunction at the triangular field, but the high number of out-of-focus shots and equipment failures produced there remains a mystery. One Gettysburg residence that is a top candidate for ghostly activity is the Kodori house. During the battle, it was in the middle of it all.
Pickett's charge, if you want to think of a focal point of the American Civil War, you may very well think that it could be the Kodori house. Situated right in the center of where Pickett's men advanced, it must be a funnel of some kind for psychic energies. How many men with hopes high passed that area going towards the Union lines, and just a few minutes later, with their hopes shattered, passed wounded or suffering going back the other way.
Over the years, the old house has been used as a residence for various park officials. During one haunting, it was the home of a park superintendent.
One night, the superintendent's daughter was out there by herself. Her father and mother had gone into town on one of the many social occasions superintendents are invited to. She was alone in the cellar, which had been fixed up as sort of a rec room. All of a sudden, she heard footsteps across the floor above her head.
At first, she thought maybe her parents had come home, but she hadn't heard them drive in.
Mom? Dad?
Suddenly, she realized it wasn't her parents, so it must have been an intruder. And of course, the Kodori house is out in the middle of nowhere and far from the local police or the ranger station. So she was frightened. She felt it was an intruder, and she would have to get to the phone somehow, which was on the first floor. The footsteps continued over her head, and then finally she heard the footsteps begin to go up to the second floor and realized this was perhaps her chance to go up to the telephone. She got up to the first floor, picked up the phone, called the ranger office. And as she's talking to them, she hears the footsteps going across the floor, upstairs, walking all around, looking, seeking something. Finally, the footsteps began coming down the stairs, so she quickly wrapped up her conversation, hung up the phone, ran back down the stairs. It seemed like an eternity. While the footsteps above her head, the intruder kept wandering back and forth into the kitchen, into the dining room, back out into the living room. Finally, she heard the footsteps slowly crossing the floor, approaching the door to the basement, and was getting more and more frightened, of course, because it was only a matter of time before he reached the place where she was hiding, in essence, and the intruder would come down the stairs, and she would have to confront him. She was so intent on listening to the footsteps coming closer and closer and closer to the stairs, to the basement where she was hiding, that she apparently didn't hear the ranger vehicle drive up.
It was the chief ranger answering her distress call.
What's going on?
Of course, he had placed his rangers outside the building, which is standard procedure, and They came in and explained to her that no one had come out through any of the windows. Thorough search of the house showed no one in the house anywhere. And of course, she was then very confused as to just exactly what it may have been that was walking around through that Kadori house. If there's an explanation for this, it could be possibly that there are some spirits left over from that great emotional trauma that we know is Pickett's charge.
The young are not the only ones affected by ghosts, and their sightings are not just a modern phenomena. One ghost appearance happened just years after the war and occurred to the oldest soldier to fight in the battle, Gettysburg's legendary old warrior, John Burns.
John Burns was sort of a cantankerous elderly gentleman, very active. He was constable in the town of Gettysburg at one point in his life, and he also served as an officer of the court.
With the commencement of the battle on July 1st, 1863, Burns was determined to enter the fray. In retrospect, the opportunity to go to war fit his personality perfectly, for he wasn't one to back down from trouble, and he was also a super patriot. Nearly everything about him was antiquated. The rifle he carried was an out-of-date flintlock, possibly left over from the War of 1812. His clothes were equally out of style. Although surprised by his age, federal troops accepted him, and he marched into battle. As a younger man, Burns had already had some military experience, so he fell right in with the ranks, although some of the men taunted him because of his age.
He gets taunted by the Union soldiers. Oh, you know, in essence, something like, oh, go home, old man, you're going to get hurt out here.
Once in battle, though, he seemed to have gained the respect of the younger men. By the afternoon's end, he had received at least 3 and maybe more gunshot wounds from the Confederate enemy. The last shot took him out of the battle.
He was carried back to his house, nursed back to health. He was written up by every reporter who could taste a good story. And he did become, in a sense, a national sensation. I don't have any belief in any supernatural medium at all. But several years after the war, Burns, then about 75 years old, found himself one summer evening walking along the area of the McPherson farm. He said it was in the wooded area. He said as he walked through the woods, he was stopped by a Confederate soldier dressed in gray with a rifle. Now, Burns was a superstitious man. He said as soon as he saw the soldier, he turned and walked out of the woods rapidly. And he said he never went back to that part of the field again. I always found that to be an interesting thought. The idea that someone who could face bullets, artillery, people trying to kill you, but yet was afraid to walk out in the woods at night. As soon as he saw something that, or thought he saw something that wasn't of this world, he said he walked away fast and wouldn't approach it.
Some claim Gettysburg's Eisenhower Farm is another historic site visited by ghostly apparitions.
Of course, 2 presidents are associated with Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln and Dwight Eisenhower. And of course, Lincoln only stayed here one night. But Dwight Eisenhower, decided to make this his home. When he finally purchased the farm here in Gettysburg, they realized as they were renovating that beneath everything was at least a 200-year-old farmhouse that had been there. Various people who've worked out at the Eisenhower farm, from employees, from the Park Service to Secret Service people, have related sounds, the auditory experiences of that are unexplained. There's also the smell, an olfactory experience, the smell of some of the perfume, some of Mamie's favorite perfume that wafts down the hallway and down the stairway. And when they go to examine the perfume bottles, of course, no one's touched the perfume bottles, no one's opened one, none of them have spilled.
An employee of the Eisenhower House described her experiences while working there alone.
There is a wooden barrier at the dining room doorway that would prevent anyone from walking into that room directly, yet it allows people visual access to that area. I was standing at the top of the stairs by myself, and I heard somebody walk from the living room across the foyer into the dining room, and it attracted my attention to the point where I followed the sound with my eyes, and the sound continued through the dining room just as if the barricade wasn't there. The other thing that I experienced in the house was one evening I was in there by myself, and I was on the sun porch, and all of a sudden I heard a bell ringing, like a handbell that was coming from the butler's pantry. There's a handbell that sits on top of a refrigerator in the butler's pantry, and I picked that bell up and I rang it. The sound that I heard when I rang it, even though that was the same sound, it was different. The sound that I had heard earlier was as if it was in, dare I say it, another dimension.
It's like looking into a Viewmaster, but I have to close.
In an attempt to learn even more about the ghosts of Gettysburg, Mark Nesbitt brought noted psychic Carol Kirkpatrick to town to see if she could use her powers to look back into time at the battle and those who fought it.
Of horses and men, and I've been down.
She indeed has a special gift. She has helped a number of law enforcement agencies all over the country to come up with leads, clues to what they have written off as unsolvable mysteries.
One ghost mystery they wanted to get to the bottom of was that of an apparition sighted in the home of Joe and Colette Hood.
We moved in our house in September, 17 years ago, when in October I was home basically during the day. It's an old farmhouse, and when I would walk from the one room to the other, I would spot this image at the top of the steps going across from room to room. And I would look up and see her, and I think, oh, well, I didn't see that, and I'd just go on about my business. Didn't say anything to anybody for, I guess, over a year.
But the ghost continued to haunt her. Finally, she told her husband.
She didn't say that she was afraid of it at any time, because I'd asked her that. And I did not feel afraid in the house. The house is a very warm-feeling house, very comfortable, you know, even if there was something in there. I can't say that the house is a scary type of house.
The Hood house is near Spangler Springs. At one time, they theorized that their ghost might be the famous woman in white.
We'd heard about the lady at Spangler Springs in white and thought perhaps that the lady at Spangler Springs was the lady that this was she that lived in our house, because we have handwritten deeds that go back to 1833 that says these were owned by Spangler at one time.
Carol Kirkpatrick was brought in to give her read on the situation. She almost immediately picked up on part of the past history of the house. The Hoods already knew this part of the story and verified it.
It was a hospital during the Civil War. I do know that the Confederates had the house the first day of the battle. The second day, the Union came in, chased them across the road, and held the house 17 days after.
The psychic soon zeroed in on what might be the mystery apparition's identity.
She told us that the lady that is in our home is a nurse, and she was a nun, and we figured she came from Emmitsburg, Maryland, because there was a nun and a priest there, and their presence were felt extremely in the one front room upstairs. And say, I see her go from room to room, so she would have been nursing the soldiers.
Carol also revealed that the ghost was not the woman in white from Spangler Springs. In fact, the apparition seemed to resent the comparison.
Carol said that the apparition in our house didn't like being identified as the lady in white from Spangler Springs simply because she is a nun and she would be a pure lady, where the lady at Spangler Springs evidently is a fallen type of woman because she must have been meeting a married man over at the Springs.
Immediately after I'd found it was a nun in the house and I went back into my background, the crosses went up on the wall. That was it. I'm not taking any chances.
Another tragic war story that may have given birth to a ghost involves General John Reynolds. Reynolds was considered by many to be one of the best and brightest officers in the Union Army. During the Battle of Gettysburg, though, the action he saw was short and deadly.
He rode into battle leading his troops about 10 o'clock in the morning of July 1st. By 10:20 he was dead, shot through the head by a Confederate sharpshooter. Reynolds became the highest-ranking Union officer to die in the battle.
Yet his presence has been felt in Gettysburg ever since the war. Perhaps his quick demise so early in the battle has been troubling him over the decades, for his spirit seems to haunt the town. One person he seems to have contacted is Carol Kirkpatrick. The incident happened during a tour of the battlefield, where she didn't know what to expect and had never heard of the general.
No one knew where we were going on the battlefield except for me. I just led them out to these places, and one of the places I wanted to take Carol was to where General John F. Reynolds was shot and killed out at Reynolds Woods. We were driving along Confederate Avenue, and all of a sudden she said, "Ouch, I have a terrible pain in my back."
It's like all the hair started standing up on the back of my head. And then as we went on, it's like the pain started going down my side, my back, my lower back got the pain, then into my leg.
I finally realized that she was talking about General Reynolds. Reynolds was shot in the back of the neck, and of course that would produce a terrible pain down your spine if that had happened.
Soon they stopped in the very area where Reynolds had been shot. Mark was careful not to tell her anything about the general. It was up to her to tell him.
I'd like to get into the person, possibly what his last feelings, activities were, what was going on at the moment he was struck, what was his last concept or factor of happening.
We were walking toward the spot where Reynolds was shot, and it was almost like reading the account from Reynolds' staff member who was right on the spot.
I feel that he was a very strong, outgoing individual, had a strong mind on ideas, factors, very calculating.
She told me that Reynolds was feeling very, very powerful at the time. Of course, he had just been offered the command of the entire Union Army, turned it down, instead was commanding the famous Union Army First Corps.
Was he setting up high when this happened?
He was on his horse. She said he turned, and she indicated the exact direction in which he turned, and she said, and then he was shot.
Amazingly then, Carol saw the death of the great general who had fallen over a century before.
Something hit him, and I felt, had he have stayed where he was, it would have possibly hit him in another area. But he was like riding around, it appeared to me, or what's shown to me. And as he rode and turned was when then he was struck.
Carol, you almost said it verbatim exactly what happened to Reynolds. I don't think Carol could have boned up on the battle. I've been studying it for 35 years, and I'm still learning things about it. Certainly she couldn't, in one evening, she couldn't have learned everything that she told me today. So it's virtually impossible for her to have known anything that she wasn't told out on the battlefield.
Sightings of the ghost of General Reynolds in town have been even spookier. After his death, his body was taken to a private residence with the odd name of the George House.
The George House, kind of an unusual name. The man's first name was George, his last name was George, but that is the name of the individual who owned it at the time of the battle. And most of the houses that are historic here in Gettysburg bear the name of the individual who lived there or owned it at the time.
The general's body was later removed to his home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he received a hero's funeral. Today, the George House is a museum and photography store.
Late one evening, after some tourists, there was an adult man and his adult daughter were window shopping at night. They had just been to a restaurant, and it was fairly late, and they were going through the town and looking in different windows. They came to this building and were looking in the windows, and they noticed what appeared to be a wax museum display inside this building. There was a man lying on a bed and a woman sitting beside the bed as if watching over him. The room was very stark.
The man had a beard like John Reynolds and was dressed in a general's uniform. This strange display was not the kind one easily forgets.
Let's go.
The tourists were a little confused about this particular display of a dead body and a woman in mourning. They thought it was rather bad taste for a museum to display this type of thing. And so they determined to come back the next day and find out what exactly this display was.
The following morning, the man and his daughter rushed back to the George House.
When they came back the next day, it was a whole different store. The empty room, which was fairly empty except for the wax figures and a few small articles of furniture, were completely gone, and almost every square inch of the store was filled with merchandise. And they were really taken aback by this. They talked to the store owners, and they were trying to describe the scene that they had witnessed.
In the vision they'd seen the night before, one of them remembered an open doorway behind the fallen general that was now covered up with pegboard. They startled the saleswomen with this revelation.
Of course, you couldn't see a door, but if the pegboard is removed, there is definitely a door there. And this was sort of, to them, was the key to the fact that something really strange had happened, because there's no way for them to know about the door when it was all covered up.
Had the tourists glimpsed a scene from a century past?
It seems that ghosts appear sometimes through an opening, a rip in time, if you will. And this apparently is what these people saw. As they looked through that window, they actually saw back in time, through that tear in time, and saw Reynolds, who was once there, and this woman who was in mourning over his body.
The Lutheran Seminary of Gettysburg is one of the town's landmarks. Established long before the war in 1826, it was well known to many of the soldiers who came to Gettysburg to fight. General Reynolds is said to have visited the school grounds prior to going into battle. Still vital today, the seminary attracts some of the top theological students in the country, including Roscoe Barnes III. it also has legends of ghost sightings. Prior to his own poltergeist encounter in 1992, Roscoe most definitely did not believe in ghosts.
As a Christian, I have certain views about the dead and what happens with the dead. I thought some people are given to that and they see what they want to see. The imagination is very powerful, and I felt that because of stories circulating in the area, well, the students were seeing what they pretty much wanted to see. That was my opinion. But of course, that all changed.
During a night in February of 1992, Roscoe was going through his usual routine. The study load at the seminary is demanding, and he was up late as usual hitting the books. Finally, he decided to go to bed. In the middle of the night, he was startled awake.
Sometime between 2 and 3, I heard a friend down the hall scream. At first, I thought he was playing another one of his jokes. And because he had been in the military, I thought he was making one of his Army calls. And I thought just for a second that maybe there's a problem. But again, I thought military, and I didn't think much of it. About 2 hours later, I was awakened by a very strange presence in the room. I was sleeping on my right side facing the window, and I just had the feeling that someone was standing in the room looking at me. You know, sometimes you can sense those things. Given my background as a Christian and Pentecostal, I felt the presence was something evil. I immediately thought there was a demonic, satanic presence in the room. I turned my head over slightly toward the left to look at this presence. I had no idea what it was or what it looked like, but I looked over there, and when I looked, I saw what appeared to be a man who appeared to be tall. I had the feeling that he was looking through me, and I quickly turned to my right, and for a second I asked myself, am I dreaming? Am I awake? Is it real? And so I looked again, the second time. He was in the same position, standing, looking the same way. So I turned back to the right and began to pray, asking God to help me, calling on the name of Christ, pleading for his help, because I was scared to death. It was frightening. I looked over the third time with more confidence, more courage, with more hope that something was going to happen. He was standing there still, I mean, on the third time, and then I turned my head and continued to pray. Lord, help me. Lord, help me. These prayers were all without any lip movement. They were all within my mind. I was afraid to move or to show much motion. I didn't know what would happen, but in my mind, I prayed that way. And then when I turned the fourth time, he was gone. And oh, was I elated.
Shaken by the experience, but fortified by his faith, Roscoe decided to let the incident pass. Several days later, however, he happened to meet his friend, the one who lived down the hallway, and who he had heard scream on the same night he had seen the ghost. Their long conversation covered many topics.
Somehow we ended up on the subject of dreams and demons. And that's when the subject came up, fear. He said, well, man, just the other night something happened to me, and it just really, it just scared the heck out of me.
Evidently, at almost the same time, the apparition Roscoe had seen had also visited his friend. Unlike the officer standing in Roscoe's room, though, for this haunting, the ghost chose only to show his head floating around the room.
Ah! 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 Ah!
At the time, I thought, we described it as a dream. But then we thought, this is too coincidental. I mean, there's got to be more to it than just a dream.
Is the Civil War still being fought in the spirit world around Gettysburg? No one can say for sure, but there are hundreds of eyewitnesses who will tell you yes. Experience 2 centuries of distinctive hospitality at Gettysburg's premier address, the Gettysburg Hotel, established 1797. For nearly 200 years, the Gettysburg Hotel has offered a proud tradition of gracious accommodations and fine dining in the heart of Gettysburg. Let the attentive staff of the Gettysburg Hotel make your visit to historic Gettysburg a memorable one. For information and reservations, call 717-337-2000.